Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gostola, managing editor for Shadowproof.com. We are busy preparing for the next month's major September hearing in Julian Assange's extradition case. We'll have an update for you at the end of our show on all of that. But before we get rolling on our whistleblower stories for the week, Brian has a few things for you.
Hey, Kevin. Hello, everybody. Good to be with all of you today. I just wanted to remind people to make sure that you subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Facebook or Twitter or whatever platform that you like to use so that you keep up to date on shows like this one, as well as our reporting. And if you're in a position to give a few bucks, Shadowproof is 100% supported by small donations from our readers and our viewers. So if you like our reporting, if you support what Kevin's doing here on the show or with Julian Assange more broadly, please consider funding our reporting by going to shadowproof.com/donate. That's my spiel. Let's dig into some of the stories you lined up for us today, Kevin. The first one here, we have the EPA urged to quit spreading tax-funded partisan propaganda on social media. What's this story?
This comes from a group called Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, or PEER. They represent employees in the environmental agencies, and that would include whistleblowers, and they're frequently using their platform to anonymously challenge the failure of this government to uphold environmental protections. And that's been very pervasive under President Donald Trump. And now they're publicly challenging the EPA and the messaging that they use for social media, which maybe we didn't know because we just sort of assumed that this is captured by this administration anyways. So all agencies are going to be used for political purposes. But it's in fact actually illegal, they point out, to engage in political self-promotion. And they would like Congress to enforce the ban against federal funding for, quote, propaganda purposes, end quote. And then they also would like to obtain reimbursement for the costs of the EPA's partisan tweets and other improper social media campaigning. That's another quote from the press release that they put out. And peers asked the Government Accountability Office, which is an office that conducts reviews of agencies, to look at the EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler's tweets and how they violate the law. And Wheeler is a coal industry lobbyist who was put in charge of running the EPA after Scott Pruitt, who was also a lobbyist for the energy industry. The tweets that they call attention to that have gone out are the following. Under President Trump's leadership, we continue to clean up the air, clean up our water, and clean up our land. And then another one was EPA is operating in the best interest of all Americans, including those who are working to keep our infrastructure running. Again, it continues. They are also, in this upcoming one, they actually tag Donald Trump's own account. So it says, under real Donald Trump's leadership, our economy is booming, air and water quality continually improving, and we are bringing real opportunities to America's forgotten communities. And then as they're highlighting here, a lot of these tweets have nothing to do with what the EPA is involved in handling. So you have examples like President Trump and the app POTUS is providing the leadership necessary to secure our southern border. Obviously, the EPA does nothing with immigration. And then also the president continues to show strong leadership during this time of a national emergency. They really shouldn't be commenting on that. That has nothing to do with EPA policy. So apparently, if the GAO concludes that this is propaganda or partisan, they could be accused of violating the Anti-Deficiency Act, which would mean that the agency would be fined $10,000 to $100,000 for each violation. And so this is, I guess not the most serious thing compared to the fact that we see a lot of pollution that is running rampant, and we see that there are hurricanes bearing down upon us, wildfires in California. We're seeing the climate catastrophe intensifying, but when you see that the EPA is actually fronting as a kind of Twitter account for a super PAC that might be boosting President Donald Trump, I think that adds to the insult of the fact that the EPA is no longer involved in environmental protection.
Thank you, Kevin. Our next story involves an insurance company that is refusing to renew malpractice insurance for a high-profile whistleblower lawyer. What is this story?
Yeah, so I'll first preface that this isn't my most favorite whistleblower attorney. In fact, I've tangled with this person before, and last week called this individual out because they're frequently deciding who is and is not a whistleblower and doing what intelligence agency officials tend to do in finding ways to disqualify people. And they don't think Edward Snowden is an NSA whistleblower. That said, this is a very important issue. And so the ABA Journal reported that the Hanover Insurance Group refused to renew malpractice coverage for Mark Zaid, who is a whistleblower attorney in DC. He represented the CIA employee who complained against Donald Trump about U.S. policy toward Ukraine. The contents of the calls between Trump and Zelensky, who's the Ukraine president, those were revealed. And then this led to impeachment in the House. So obviously, he played a crucial role in representing this figure, and politically speaking, that had a huge impact. And Hanover apparently said they no longer have a, quote, appetite for his, and they, as again, this is another quote of theirs, high-profile work. They described it as high-profile work. And the company was asked to reconsider by Zaid, and then the company refused. So Hanover claims that they had no idea that Mark Zaid was representing whistleblowers, which is laughable. And so he says, they knew he represented them back in 2019 when he applied for the coverage. Apparently, this is the company he's only had since 2019. Of course, the company is maintaining that this is not related to the impeachment proceedings that unfolded. But national security counselors points out that Hanover has gone out of its way to tell potential clients that they'll insure lawyers who defend people accused of retaliation. So that could be employers, it could be management, people in management positions, but they apparently have no appetite for those who face retaliation. So what this is very revealing about an aspect of the world of insurance. These lawyers have to have that so that they can protect themselves from malpractice lawsuits. And, obviously we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years an uptick in the ways that you'll see individuals try to abuse defamation laws, or even, any ways that they can come after and engage in retaliatory lawsuits so that they can undermine the ability of someone to do the work that they do representing people. And, as much as I disagree with Mark and the way that he is limiting who is and is not a whistleblower, I can't really argue he represents people who come from federal agencies who have gone through channels who don't deserve retaliation, and he protects them as they try to navigate the processes of whistleblower protections, as meager as those might be. And I don't think this is a good development that an insurance company is not willing to insure Mark Zaid because he might represent high-profile whistleblowers.
Our next story here is out of Minnesota, where we have a whistleblower lawsuit with an officer who claims that he was forced to use ketamine on arrestees. What do we have here?
Yeah, so this story comes from The Intercept, who interviewed Joseph Baker, who has worked as a paramedic for the emergency medical services in Woodbury, which is a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota. This whistleblower lawsuit says that, quote, police pressured him to administer ketamine, a fast-acting sedative, during an arrest. He believes that it's not an appropriate use of his job as a paramedic to have to apply this. And this lawsuit's apparently a first of its kind whistleblower lawsuit against ketamine use by the police. And there's really nobody else who has gone to the step of challenging this. But we've also seen a trend in the last few years to start relying on this sedative. For context, back in 2019 in Colorado, Elijah McClain, who was a 23-year-old, a young black man, he died from a police chokehold in the summer of 2019. The Aurora police injected McClain with ketamine while in handcuffs. That has resulted in Colorado lawmakers pushing for restrictions on the use of sedatives that are applied against the will of individuals who are placed under arrest. So Baker says that he feels he was pushed out of his job after refusing to administer ketamine in an incident in September 2019. And prior to that, he had to give ketamine injections on 3 other occasions as part of the Woodbury EMS. And he recalled a trigger-happy mentality in the department around the drug. That's according to the Intercepts report. And Baker says, quote, the dispatchers would say, get your ketamine ready, bring your ketamine, he said. And his lawsuit claims that the, quote, symbiotic relationship between EMS and police officers has created room for police officers to coerce paramedics like himself to administer ketamine on unwilling subjects. Another thing he points out is that he was someone who studied de-escalation. He's very big about what he calls verbal judo as an EMS person. He has a background as a military police officer, but as he lays out here, he says he believes it's a powerful weapon to be able to use language to de-escalate. He's someone who thinks he can convince people to communicate about 90% of the time. And he said he would try to humanize himself when he was working as an EMS or as a paramedic. He would talk to patients about their family. He might talk about sports with them while they were going through whatever it is he was responding to. And he says, quote, I was also aware that my uniform was very similar to that of a police officer, which is inherently stressful, especially to patients with mental illness. And so this is obviously very topical at the moment with what's going on in our country. And I think this is an important whistleblower lawsuit to pay close attention. And as he says, he would rather use talking and conversation than the crutch of injecting people with some drug against their will. And that can work. He says those words can actually work when he is working as an EMS.
Thank you, Kevin. Definitely an important issue with a long and troubling history for policing and mental health. I want to turn to our next story here. We have a Spanish whistleblower who says a new EU directive should protect him from retaliation. What is this story?
Recently in the European Union, there was a directive that was adopted to enhance enforcement of EU law and policies in specific arenas or areas of society. So in the EU, this could involve public procurement. This could involve financial services and the markets. It might be money laundering. Maybe there was a bank that was allowing terrorist financing to go on. That's actually happened before. It's not that absurd. HSBC was accused of this. Transport safety, protection of the environment. They might be involved in pollution. There could be nuclear safety protocols that are being violated, maybe food safety or agriculture, maybe animal cruelty is occurring. There could be public health violations. Consumer protections might be undermined. And there also might be privacy protections and personal data privacy that isn't being respected. So the whistleblowing could involve the security of networks and information systems. And so they're working to reinforce and expand the protections for whistleblowers throughout the entire EU and make it possible for any residents in the EU to enjoy these protections. So there's a Spanish whistleblower named Robert Macias who filed an appeal with the EU, and he's one of the first whistleblowers to claim under this new directive that he should be protected. And what makes this story important is he already faces a 2-year prison sentence for disseminating allegedly confidential documents when he exposed fraud that resulted in a major prosecution in Spain. And the sentence was widely viewed as whistleblower retaliation. This was covered by the New York Times recently. He worked for 4 years as an official for one of Spain's 2 main unions, which is called the General Union of Workers. He suspected the union was engaging in wrongdoing, and so he downloaded thousands of computer files from his workplace, according to the New York Times. And then in 2013, a few months after he was laid off, he leaked these files to Spanish newspapers. That led to a national scandal. It implicated officials in the misuse of public money. And then the money that the union received was supposed to be spent on helping the unemployed, but it wasn't. It was going towards feasts for the union, and there were other accusations that were made about the abuse of these funds. And so Macias, even though he leaked the files anonymously, the union turned around and supported cyber detective work to expose his identity. When they found out who was responsible for the release of these files, they filed a criminal lawsuit against him, and they argued that under Spanish law, he was supposed to protect confidentiality in the workplace, and he should have complained to the court or the police, and he should not have gone to the press with these allegations. And then that led to his prison sentence, which he is now working to overturn, and would like the EU to help him so that he does not suffer for exposing what most of the press, and I assume Spanish society, agrees was a scandal.
Thanks, Kevin. Let's turn to our final segment here. We have a story here involving Julian Assange, and I know you have some updates on your upcoming coverage. But first, we want to talk about this. After more than 6 months, Assange was finally allowed to visit, quote unquote, with family. What is this story?
Yeah, this is a big deal because we know with COVID-19 pandemic, and this is for almost any prison around the world, especially in countries that have not taken the appropriate steps to control the spread of the virus. So, in this case, we would be talking about the United States being the worst offender, and many families have been without much contact, if they've had any contact at all, for the last 6 months when it comes to prisons. In London, this is the first time since March 22nd that Julian Assange was able to have a visit with his fiancée, Stella Morris, and his 2 children, who are 1 and 3 years old. And so they came, but at Belmarsh, he had to wear a face mask, and he had to wear visor for a 20-minute meeting, and they were not allowed to touch each other. In fact, he was told if he had touched his children, he would have to isolate for 2 weeks. And so that essentially would be solitary confinement that he would have to endure in order, just because he maybe wanted to hold his kids during this time, or give them a hug. So Julian said it was the first time he had been given a mask because things are very different behind the doors. This coming from Stella. Oh, by the way, this was covered by PA Media Group, which is in London. Stella said, I could not see him very clearly because of the visors, but he looked a lot thinner. He was wearing a yellow armband to indicate his level of prisoner status, and you could see how thin his arms were. At least he got to see the children, even though he couldn't touch them. The children were both calm. We all remained seated the whole time. There's this story that is very humanizing about Gabriel reciting the alphabet and counting and showing his dad that he's learning at the age of 3. And then Stella says that Assange is still suffering from a frozen shoulder and recently sprained his ankle and is in a lot of pain. It was clear that there is suffering that continues for Assange. We know his health hasn't been good the entire time that he's been incarcerated or detained for this period, while he awaits the outcome of his extradition case.
Thanks,
Kevin. So I guess I was going to have you cut in and ask me another question, but I'll just go on to the updates that we have about our Assange coverage coming up, and then you can conclude with any other remarks that you have for this week's episode. Any business things you want to talk about with Shadowproof? So we put in a application to the UK court on August 25th, which was 2 days before recording this edition of the show. And I made it clear that I was not comfortable with the risks posed to my health if I would have to travel to the courthouse in the United Kingdom. There were unclear instructions, in fact, no instructions given to me. So I didn't know if I would have to quarantine for 10 or 14 days before the hearing is scheduled to start on September 7th. And in fact, I was not in London yet. So if I needed to quarantine for 2 weeks, I would have to get to London and I would have to stay somewhere. And when the proceedings began on Monday, I would not be able to go to the courthouse. I would probably not be able to go to the courthouse to cover until the second week of the proceedings. And so I made the decision that given the lack of instruction from the court, that I wanted to push for remote access for all international journalists. It seems like there shouldn't be much issue with anyone who is based in the UK if they would like to be accredited and have access. It seems like there are going to be at least one, if not two rooms that journalists can go in. Expect a few dozen journalists who are in the country to be able to cover the proceedings. But what about international journalists? I mean, I'm in this predicament. Stefania Marizzi, an Italian journalist well known for her coverage of this case, also has to contend with the same issues that I'm contending with. I know that Joe Loria of Consortium News has wanted to, has covered this and was there at the extradition hearing last round in February. There are other American journalists who would normally travel if there wasn't a global pandemic. What are we supposed to do? We didn't receive any instruction. But fortunately, I submitted this application. I never heard any official response from the court, but fortunately, there isn't anything additional that I need to do at this time with that application. I received instructions today that said there's going to be a cloud video platform for journalists. This is excellent news. This means that I can cover the hearing from wherever I am in the United States. Be in Chicago. I might be in another state for a period of time, but I'm going to be able to cover it. I'll have to contend with the time zone difference, and that's going to make this an adjustment as far as my schedule goes. I'll be doing my coverage from 3 a.m. to 10 or 11 a.m. in the morning in order to follow this very closely. And it's going to be exhausting. And but I know I'm going to have all of your support as I crank out these reports and do what I did last round in February. I expect it to be very intense, but the fact that we've now resolved this outstanding issue and the court is finally giving journalists some kind of information about what they plan to do is such a relief. So far, we have had extraordinary difficulties with this court and what they have done during the COVID-19 pandemic. Any case management hearings in the past 4 to 6 months have been plagued with issues. They have a conference call video line. I don't know how many of you are aware of what's gone on, but they have been so dysfunctional in how this is conducted that journalists get on the conference call line. They aren't muted, so people are talking and there's background noise and you can't follow the court proceedings, or they don't patch you into the court so you can't hear what's happening in court, or there's music, or they give you the wrong courtroom and you get the wrong case that you're listening to and you need to move over and then you miss what happened in the Assange case management hearing. And for the most part, there isn't anything from the court in the way of an apology or an admission that they screwed up. There's no resolution to this, and we're just left hanging. And so we've been proactive, trying to make sure that this doesn't happen when this critical hearing happens on September 7th. It's going to go through some exceptional issues. It's also the only evidentiary hearing that Assange is going to get in this case. This is his big opportunity to put evidence on the record that will rebut the United States and convince, hopefully, the judge that he should not be extradited to the United States. And we know, given all of the risks to press freedom, that it's crucial that people are able to pay attention. Unfortunately, under law in the UK, it's prohibited to live stream to the public this court proceeding. But the press, myself, we will do our best to be your eyes and ears and to cover and to give you up-to-the-minute reports while it's unfolding. And then my process will be similar to what happened in February, where I'll do a report, a video report at the end of the court day, which is going to be, for me, at about 11 or noon on any given day. And then I will do a write-up about what happened that was significant. And so we'll get tweeting, you'll get a video, and then you'll get a written report. And that'll be comprehensive coverage of what's going on in this case that we've committed ourselves to covering at shadowproof.com for very many reasons, but also some of it has to do with the last 10 years. This has been a focus of my work, and it goes all the way back to Chelsea Manning's court-martial. And I'm just finishing up this thread. It's hard to ignore the fact that the publisher, which the source gave material to, is now facing prosecution. And that's why it is, I think, critical for Shadowproof to be out in front, giving this the attention and the coverage that is demanded.
Definitely. And I just want, for folks who are listening out there, I want to commend you, Kevin, for all of the hard work, obviously not just over the years, but in particular, given how complicated things are with the pandemic and trying to cover a case that's happening in London, and trying to arrange that while we're in the United States. You have done really amazing work on that. And I just want to encourage folks, what Kevin is doing and what he's talking about is indeed an incredibly important public service. It is something that is going to take a lot of labor. It already has. And even though he may not be traveling, we should be considering how we can support him in that work. So I just want to encourage folks. We're going to probably put out a call in the next week or so as we approach the date, but you can get a head start if you want to help Kevin, support him, if you want to back him up while he's in there, like you said, being your eyes and ears. Consider going to shadowproof.com/donate. Even if you're just giving $5 or $10, it helps. So please consider supporting his work. It's a lot of work. It's a lot. So
yeah, and if you'd like something for your support, there's the Dissenter newsletter, which is a companion to this weekly show. That's at dissenter.substack.com. And there's a free edition that goes out early in the week, and then towards the end of the week, there's an exclusive edition that's for people who are paid subscribers. And that money will go to fund this journalism, and then some of it also goes to fund the regular journalism at Shadowproof. Mm-hmm. And I want to say that it's possible that we may have to fall back on a contingency plan and travel to London if this video access does not work. And I just described how the conference call line has been a complete clusterfuck, for lack of a better word. If that is the case with this video technology, I will be in a position, an uncomfortable position, where I have to decide whether to hop on a plane immediately, go make accommodations for lodging in London, and to get there so that I can cover what is a critical hearing. I emphasize that this is a one-time opportunity for his legal team to put on this evidence, call these witnesses. It's unfortunate it's happening during a global pandemic, but there is a case for this to proceed, and there's a case for this to proceed because Julian Assange's legal team wants it to proceed and not be delayed. I actually think that there's more interest in delaying if you're the Justice Department. The people who want it to go on are the defense, because he is languishing in this cell so long as this extradition case drags on without any ruling from the judge. And so once they get a ruling from the judge, if it's a terrible outcome, then they can go immediately to an appeals court, and then they can try with that appeals court to get some kind of bail and maybe home confinement and I expect it will be the case if the global pandemic remains an issue. And then he could free himself from this Belmarsh security, this maximum security prison, and then wait for the appeal to continue to unfold at that next level. But we have to get the ruling from the judge before we can talk about any of this. So I'm this is way ahead in the future.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably 2021, maybe even middle of 2021 kind of stuff. But you have to have this hearing now. I mean, if you waited and had it in 2021, then it could be the end of 2021 and 2022 before you find out if the extradition was approved or not. So those are important details to keep in mind. And just know that if you're supporting me, you're giving funds that might allow for us to hop on a plane and get to London immediately if I needed to do that in order to provide coverage.
Thank you, Kevin. I already see we got a couple donations in, so I just wanted to say thank you and encourage more folks to give what they can and tell your friends and your family, other people that that might be interested in Kevin's reporting. Anything you can do to help will be great, and I think it's in the public interest, broadly speaking, given the free speech issues at hand here. So. Any final thoughts or anything you'd like to say before we wrap, Kev? Or
no, we may be off next week. It's possible we don't have a show. It's possible that you may not hear from the Dissenter Weekly until next week. And obviously, with the hearing in September, we likely will not do this the same. If we do a show, I might bring somebody on who has been covering this case. We might do an interview kind of a show, or I might just provide an update on what's been happening in the past week. We'll see as we get there. But for now, I would just say that there's probably no show next week. And then, in September, we'll pick these shows back up so that we can continue to do this kind of work.
Sounds good. Please just make sure that you're following us wherever you're watching right now. Tell your friends, chip into Kevin's coverage if you can at shadowproof.com/donate. And I hope everyone has a great weekend, and we will talk to you very soon. Take care.